right. Looks like we're all here, yes? Or are we waiting for anyone?
No, I think all of the council members are here and staff too. So you're good to go, Mayor.
All right, then we shall begin. Welcome to the City Council meeting of March the 3rd, 2021. Temporary public email established for the city of Los Banos. Temporary comment email. And for public comment, emails must be received by 4 p.m. Send them to the city clerk at losbanos.org. And we have a unique situation tonight due to unforeseen circumstances with the computer equipment at City Hall that broadcasts meetings to the YouTube channel. Today's City Council meeting is being broadcast and recorded through Zoom only, not Channel 96 or YouTube. The public is allowed to sign on to Zoom and watch the meeting live, and a recorded version of this meeting will be available on the city's website tomorrow. So if you go to the city's website, the Zoom link is there for the meeting. I would read it, but it might take a half an hour. So we will move on to turn the page. We have a minister here tonight to deliver an invocation. Pastor Ken Heaton from New Beginnings Church. Pastor Heaton, are you here? I'm looking for Pastor Heaton and I don't see him in the Zoom. Okay.
It doesn't look like he's on the line.
No, I sent him the information. Maybe he just got busy.
All right. Well, I don't see Pastor Heaton, so we will move on and call the meeting to order at 4:02 p.m. And we will ask Police Chief Breezy to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Chief. Roll call, Ms. Maloney.
Jones,
Present.
Lambert,
Here.
Lewis,
Here.
Lamas,
Here.
Faria,
Here. We have a quorum. Now the chair will entertain a motion to consider the approval of the agenda as submitted.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lewis, I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Mr. Mayor, Yamas here. I'll second that.
Thank you. I have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Lewis and a second by Councilmember Yamas to approve the agenda as submitted. Ms. Maloney, roll call, please.
Jones,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Lamas,
Yes.
Faria.
Yes, motion carried unanimously. We will begin tonight with the presentation of the proclamation recognizing March as Music in Our Schools Month. And we invited the senior member of the music staff from the district, who's been the longest here besides me, Mr. Chris Helbling. And I'll read this proclamation. Whereas March has been designated by the National Association for Music Education as Music in Our Schools Month, encouraging schools across the nation to focus on music education. And whereas Music in Our Schools began with a one-day event in New York in 1973 and has grown into a month-long international celebration of school music. And whereas the purpose of this celebration is to raise awareness of the importance of music education and to remind us that school is where all children should have access to music. And whereas Music in Our Schools Month is an opportunity for music teachers to bring music programs to the attention of the school and the community, and to display the benefits that school music provides students of all ages. And whereas music education shapes the way our students understand themselves and the world around them, allowing for a deep engagement with learning. The skills nurtured by music education, such as creativity, collaboration, communication, and critical thinking, are vital to students' academic, personal, and professional success. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the mayor and city council members of the city of Los Banos do hereby recognize March as Music in Our Schools Month and urge all citizens to take an interest in and give full support to the unique contributions and benefits music programs and schools provide for our children. And this is the proclamation, complete with the Music in Our Schools logo added to it. We want to thank Sarah for that. Mr. Helbling, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, please. On behalf of the 7 music teachers in our public schools in Los Banos, we wish to thank you for this recognition. We would like to thank the principals at our schools, the members of the Board of Education, and our superintendent, Dr. Marshall, for their incredible support in helping us to bring music to the children here. And we also wish to thank you, Mr. Mayor, and the members of the City Council and the City of Los Banos for being such a wonderful place to raise a family and fill our schools with these fabulous children. Your recognition is quite lovely and humbling. Mi corazón está lleno de felicidad. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Helbling. My honor. Of course, as a music teacher myself, all the doors music opened. Thank you once again. I will be delivering the proclamation to the school district office so they can have it there for the month and forever, actually. All right. So now, with that, we will move to our public forum. Members of the public may address the city council members on any item of public interest that is within the jurisdiction of the city council. This includes agenda and non-agenda items. No action will be taken on non-agenda items. Speakers may submit their comments by submitting a written statement limited to 250 words or less, by dropping it off in the utility payment box at City Hall, 520 J Street, by mailing or emailing to the city clerk, cityclerk@losbanos.org, and comments received will be read into the record during the city council meeting. Ms. Maloney, do we have any comments in the public forum?
I have received no public comments by email.
Thank you very much. Seeing no email comments, we will move on to consideration of the approval of the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be voted on in one motion unless removed from the consent agenda by a council member. And Ms. Maloney, would you please read the consent agenda items for us tonight?
Items on the consent agenda are as follows. Warrant numbers 225691 through 225858 in the amount of $745,981.64. Minutes for the February 17th, 2021 City Council meeting. Minutes for the February 23rd, 2021 adjourned City Council meeting. City Council Resolution number 6327, approving the submittal of applications for per capita grant funds. City Council Resolution number 6328, accepting a grant deed for a 10-foot by 435-foot strip of land for right-of-way purposes, together with a 10-foot by 435-foot public utility easement in the frontage of 1518 South Ortigalita Road, and authorizing the city manager to execute all required documents for this dedication acceptance. Ted Crocker. City Council Resolution number 6329, approving and adopting final tract map number 2017-03, Sunrise Ranch Phase 1, and accompanying subdivision improvement agreement, Stonefield Home Inc. City Council Resolution Number 6330, approving and adopting final tract map number 2017-03, Sunrise Ranch Phase 2, and accompanying subdivision improvement agreement, Stonefield Home. City Council Resolution Number 6331, accepting public improvements for South Point at Regency Park Phase 2, Stonefield Home, Inc. City Council Resolution Number 6332, accepting public improvements for South Point at Regency Park Phase 3, Stonefield Home. City Council Resolution Number 6333, accepting public improvements which have been substantially completed for lots 137 through 144 within Marchoki Court of East Center Phase 2A, Pioneer Development Company, Inc. And the items are to be approved as submitted.
Thank you. City Council, I'll go through, and if you would let me know if there are any items you would like to pull from the consent agenda, and if you would please let me know whether you would like them pulled for discussion or for a separate vote. And we will start with Mr. Jones.
No items, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Lambert,
No items here either, Mayor.
thank you. Ms. Lewis,
None, Mr. Mayor.
thank you. And Mr. Yamas,
None, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
thank you. And I have none myself. So the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Mayor, Councilmember Lambert here. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the consent agenda as it reads.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Lambert. Second,
Mayor, Councilmember Lewis, I'll second that motion.
thank you. So I have a motion by Councilmember Lambert and a second by Mayor Pro Tem Lewis to approve the consent agenda as submitted. Ms. Maloney, roll call.
Jones,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Lamas,
Yes.
Faria.
Yes, motion carried unanimously. Moving on to item 8, Community Development Block Grant Code Enforcement Services Update. And this is an informational item only, requires no action. And for that, we will go to Police Chief Breezy and Police Commander Reyna.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm proud to present to you Commander Reyna tonight. He is in charge of our code enforcement division, our detectives, and in our ongoing process of encouraging our command staff to present themselves to you in their growth. I am going to turn it over to him and allow him to make the presentation tonight regarding the CSG update for code enforcement. So Commander Reyna, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chief. Hello, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. It's my pleasure to provide a brief update into our CDBG code enforcement grant operations so far. I'm going to go to the presentation, and if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. Next slide, please. The CDBG grant was awarded to the City of Los Banos in August of 2020, with a performance period of May 15th, 2020 to May 15th of 2023. And the federal funding is allocated to the state through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The grant was $500,000. It funds one full-time code enforcement officer to perform services in the city for 40 hours a week, and that is through CSG Consultants Incorporated. The services are also to be performed in the designated census tracts, and this was a $0 matching grant. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the contract code enforcement officer was assigned to work in the designated census tracts. So here I have added a map of the city and the census tracts associated with the grant. They are highlighted in red, and they are census tracts 2201, block groups 1 through 5, and 2202, block groups 3 through 4. This area is essentially the northwest portion of the city, which is west of Mercy Springs, Highway 165 to Badger Flat Road, and north of Pacheco Boulevard, Highway 152 to Wilmont Avenue and H Street. These locations are selected based on information from the U.S. Census Bureau, and they must meet the threshold for low and moderate income areas. Our contract employee may actually only work in these specific areas. And I added this map, but I just want to point out, I didn't design this map. This map was actually put together by Sandra Benetti from Community and Economic Development. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. And in speaking about the award of the contract, it's important to note that we did receive the award in August of 2020. Once we went through the competitive bid process and CSG was awarded the bid, we were assigned a full-time code enforcement officer the following month in September of 2020. Unfortunately, the officer didn't work out. She was only here about a week and a half. And so we worked with CSG to find a replacement. We received a replacement in October, but it was only on a part-time basis because the officer was assigned to another jurisdiction. So as we worked with CSG, we were assigned our current full-time officer, who is Jeff McCourt, and he has been with us since November 2nd, 2020, and he's actually been working out great. And next slide, please. So as you know, statistics play a role in what we do. So I've included some of our numbers. It's important to remember that the statistics that I've laid out here, for the most part, reflect Officer McCourt's activity from November to December. They do include the 1 week code enforcement officer work that was done in September and the part-time work that was done in October. So our CSG staff have investigated about 162 complaints. Now those complaints are made up of complaints generated from the public, from city staff, members of the council, as well as proactive enforcement. So in total, the CSG staff have abated about 123 vehicles in the city in the target location. So as I mentioned, we do assign our staff complaints. The complaints come in from a variety of sources, but we do ask them to be proactive as well. So that number reflects the activity, calls that come in, as well as proactive activity. So for example, the officer may be responding to handle a complaint or coming back from a complaint. They may see something such as graffiti. They may see another code enforcement issue, and we do encourage them to respond to those and handle those, just as if they were a call that came in through the police department or through the code enforcement division. So at the bottom of the page, I've also added the total number of cases that were investigated by the entire police department code enforcement division as an example. We also excluded animal control from this number. So in 2020, the code enforcement division as a whole handled approximately 3,082 complaints, and that also does include proactive enforcement. And during this time also, we had one code enforcement officer who was out on long-term protected leave and another who was out on short-term protected leave. Next slide. Here I have included an example of the weekly code enforcement activity update that is published by the department. For example, this is an update that went out in February, and it's designed to share with you the great work our staff are doing every day to keep the city looking good. This also breaks down activity from the CSG code enforcement officers as well, again, to share with you what we are doing. And as you can see, we have, there you go. As you can see, we have several different call types on the left-hand side, and it just helps you to understand what the officers are spending their time on. And it also gives you an example of what types of calls are coming in. So what we're handling and what's coming in. At the bottom, we share with you comparisons from the same period the previous year. So if you look at the bottom in the CSG incident category, there's nothing to compare. And that's simply because last year in February, we did not have CSG staff working with us through a contract. And next slide, please. So in regards to the financials, the grant was awarded to us in the amount of $500,000. However, we are only authorized to spend $465,116 for code enforcement activity. The remainder is approved to offset the cost of administering the grant. So from September to December, we have spent approximately $19,976.12 between activity and admin. And again, please remember that we really did not have anyone full-time until November. And as we move through the grant period, we do anticipate having excess funding available towards the end of the grant period during the operational period. So we would essentially do what we did last time we had this grant. We would work with finance and CSG. We'd figure out how much excess funding we have, and then we could add a second code enforcement officer through CSG through the remainder of the grant period to make sure that we spend all of the funding. This would also increase our code enforcement efforts during that time period. So the plan is to spend all of the money. Next slide. I've included a few before and after photos as examples of some of the areas that have been abated by Officer McCourt in the census tract. Hopefully, these are areas that perhaps none of you ever saw as a problem, or maybe we were able to abate them and address them quickly. So in this photograph, for example, Officer McCourt documented before and after photos of a mess that we encountered in front of a complex. And as you can see, the area is full of trash. The trash enclosure is a mess. It's riddled with garbage, and it appears that there are large trash items around the trash bin. So Officer McCourt worked with the property owner, and we worked with them to close off the trash enclosure and to keep trash out of the public view. So I think it worked out really well. Next slide. So this was another complaint we received. It was regarding trash and debris that was causing a hazard. And we worked with a property owner to remove the garbage. Things like this can attract rodents. They can be a hazard, and it's offensive to the neighborhood. So we worked with a property owner, and I think this one also worked out pretty well. And in the next slide, there are before and after photos here. So this residence had 2 inoperable vehicles in the driveway. The front of the residence was a mess. There was trash piled on at least one of the cars. It was a mess. It was causing a nuisance. So again, we worked with the property owner to abate both vehicles. And as you can now see, the driveway is being used as it is intended. There are 2 fully functional vehicles in the driveway. There's no trash. And I believe it has contributed to the overall beautification of that neighborhood. And the last slide. So in closing, I want to say that we're very proud to serve the city of Los Banos and contribute to the beautification of our city. It's not me. I like the chief said, I run the code enforcement division. But I need to shout out to my staff, Sergeant Mendez. He is the supervisor of the division, and he's always available. He's always available on his phone, even on the weekends, his days off, and he has a no problem, we'll handle it attitude, and I appreciate that. Dana Rawls is our administrative clerk. Many of you know her. Everything in code enforcement and animal control goes through Dana. She does the job of 2 or 3 people. She's hardworking, and we couldn't do the job without her. And then our code enforcement officers are Jeremy Sterling, Evelyn Rosas, Jennifer Hogan, and Jeff McCourt. They're all putting in work. They're working 7 days a week. We have 7-day-a-week coverage now, and I'm very proud of their efforts. And then last, animal control is under our umbrella, so I can't go without thanking Jason and Kristen out at the shelter. They do an amazing job. And last, I got to throw a shout out to my partner, Commander Hedden. So the majority of this work here was in 2020, and Commander Hedden oversaw code enforcement in 2020. So I really appreciate his efforts as well. That concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander Reyna. Outstanding presentation. We'll go to council and see if we have any questions. Mr. Jones, any questions of Commander Reyna?
No questions at this time, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Lambert, any questions?
No questions here either, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis, any questions?
I don't have any questions at this time, but I would like a request if Commander Reyna could send us to the council an email of the presentation to give us a little bit of chance to review it and perhaps get back to him later with some questions, but I have none at this time.
Thank you very
Absolutely.
much. And Mr. Yamas.
Mr. Mayor, no comments, no questions at this time. Thank you very much, Commander.
Thanks,
Thank
sir.
you very much. Thank you, Commander. Thank you, Chief Breezy. And we will continue to stay on this. Nice to have that grant to help us deal with these challenges. We'll move on now to item number 9. And that is the consideration of adoption of City Council Resolution number 6334, authorizing the city manager to execute amendment number 1 to the professional services agreement with Mark Thomas and Company Incorporated for engineering services for the Pioneer Road widening project. And for that, we will go to Acting Public Works Director, Mr. Pizeshk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'm going to rely on my notes quite a bit here with your permission. I do have a very short slide presentation as a way to provide a general overview of the project. There are a lot of facts and details here related to this. And I've provided as much as possible in the staff report. And I will refer to all those items. The first slide is simply a shot of the existing Pioneer Road along a section of it. Next slide, please. And this is basically what you can find in Google Maps, basically an overhead view of the project. And in the middle, running east-west, you can identify Pioneer Road. Next slide, please. And this is basically in highlighted blue, in thick blue. This is the project itself that we are talking about. It's the alignment, the proposed alignment for Pioneer Road. And in overall, it's Pioneer Road is going to end up being a 6.5-mile, 4-lane arterial road with a Class 1 multi-use path that is supposed to start, proposed to start at a new signalized intersection on the west side of this diagram, basically. At Pacheco Boulevard, which is State Route 152. Then the alignment will run south on the east side of the Pacheco Creek to the existing Pioneer Road, follow the alignment of the existing Pioneer Road all the way easterly to Ward Road, and then follow Ward Road north to a signalized intersection at Pacheco Boulevard again. And the road is going to be designed per city standards. Obviously, some of the requirements of Caltrans in some sections have to be followed as we are within Caltrans right away and we connect to Caltrans facilities. So this is basically a very broad overview of the project. It's been developed over the past few years through a joint effort between the city, Merced County Association of Governments, MCAG, and Caltrans. Next slide, please. Basic project objectives here: improving accessibility and circulation, providing a local alternative route parallel to Pacheco Boulevard, providing congestion relief and improving traffic flow, And also, as I mentioned, providing a multi-use class 1 trail consistent with our bicycle pedestrian plan. The next slide, please. And I'm not going to go through every one of these items. I just wanted to illustrate to you that through our collaboration with the MCAG and Caltrans, we have pursued a number of funding sources. These are some of them, most of them basically, that we have managed to tap into and secure funding for the project. There are other sources of funding that we are also pursuing, and we will continue as long as we can to make sure that we secure the funding that is available for this project. Next slide, please. So where are we with this project? I will get into phases 2A, 2B, and C in a minute. The phase 1 was basically what was authorized with the original professional services agreement that the council approved for Mark Thomas and the company. During this, basically this phase 1, a project study report, project development support, it's called a PSR PDS that was developed. And the next phases are phase 2A, 2B, 2C. That's where the environmental document will be developed. And then we have phase 3 where detailed design for the project will take place. And after that, we can advertise the project and take it into construction. So basically, we have finished phase 1. The document has been developed and approved by Caltrans. It basically sets the guidelines for taking the project into phase 2 and also sets us up for being able to ask for additional funding for the project. So the purpose of this item tonight is to ask for council's authorization with this amendment to move from phase 1 into phase 2. Next slide, please. And this is basically a summary of the approvals and actions by the council over the past few years as this project has been developed and has moved forward. Next slide, please. So with your approval and authorization of the amendment to professional services agreement with Mark Thomas, these are the next steps that we will take in phase 2. And I will go over these in a few minutes in more detail. I just wanted to summarize these, and I will come back to all of these later. Thank you for the slides. The professional services agreement with Mark Thomas was approved by the council on February 19, 2020. As I mentioned, it also authorized that we proceed with phase 1 services. So Mark Thomas began preparing the document that I referred to. The acronym is PSR PDS. It's simply a document that is required by the state of California. It defines the technical studies that are needed for phase 2. There are different ways to prepare documents for different projects. This document studies all those alternatives or available sources or methods that documents can be presented and settles in on, okay, these are the types of documents that everybody agrees that would be needed for phase 2. That establishes those requirements and also gives us this document that we can use whenever we go out and ask for funding. This is what the project is, and this is how it is defined. This is how the parameters are set up. That document was prepared after the council's approval of the agreement, and it was submitted to Caltrans late last year, and towards the end of January, it was approved. So that basically completed phase 1 services. As part of those services also, in addition to preparing this document, the consultant, Mark Thomas, worked with us, with the city, and assisted us in identifying additional sources of funding. And that was, quite frankly, a very extensive and extended effort. And there is a project funding memo that I've attached to this report, a 2-page table basically, and it identifies even in the footer what the status of these the sources of funding, what the status is, and where we are with those. And again, as I mentioned, there are other sources of funding that we are pursuing, and as the project evolves more, it puts us in a better position to show where the project is, show our commitment to the project, and be able to position ourselves favorably in securing these funds. So with your permission, I'd like to go into phase 2 in a little bit more detail. Phase 2 in general is called PAED. The preliminary designs for project alternatives will be developed here. Environmental technical studies will be prepared to evaluate project alternatives to avoid, minimize, or mitigate any impacts. A traffic study will be prepared to analyze how the city's roadway network operates with the project alternatives and when improvements are needed. Using the traffic study, then we develop a project phasing based on the traffic needs, and we will use that to prioritize construction of segments of this project. The environmental studies, technical studies that I referred to, those will be used to prepare an environmental document. Whenever you have state and federal funding involved, environmental compliance of different levels are required. So one for the state is compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and at the federal level is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. So again, the purpose of the studies, environmental studies at the state and federal requirement levels, is to identify the impacts, potential impacts that this project has on, in general, flora and fauna. Farmland, as far as the resources that we are talking about, the farmlands, noise, wetlands, traffic, any cultural impacts, air quality impacts, any impact, for example, even on utilities will be identified as part of these technical studies and the environmental review. Overall, the impact is to minimize the potential impact to the resources. If the impacts are unavoidable, and there are projects of this size that identify areas where impact cannot be avoided, then mitigation measures would be developed. For example, we are not talking about this project, but let's say you have a project where a portion of the wetland is impacted and you cannot avoid that. Then the quality and the degree of quality of that wetland area is analyzed and identified, and based on that, you have to create, for example, similar amount or a multiple amount of that affected area someplace else. So you mitigate by doing something else that actually helps nature and compensates for any impacts that we have had here. And I've run into projects like that in the past. So the idea is to identify these impacts and find ways to mitigate those impacts. So this is the overall phase 2, but as we looked at different sources of funding, different requirements come with different pots of money. So one of those requirements basically ended up being that phase 2 had to be broken up into 3 phases. And I'll explain that in a minute. These phases, phase 2A, which is the subject of this, this amendment, is for engineering services in general. Phase 2B is for environmental services, which I just talked about, developing the environmental technical documents and providing environmental compliance for the project. And phase 2C is surveying and right-of-way services. This is where we actually do the survey, detailed survey of the project and identify where the right-of-ways are, and also develop right-of-way technical documents that will be used in phase 3 down the road for right-of-way acquisition, and also to finalize the construction documents for the project. As I mentioned, this amendment is basically for phase 2A. And under this amendment, our consultant will prepare a concept level design. They will not get into it significantly in detail because a lot of that happens once we know the traffic requirements and once we identify the some of the environmental impacts. They will develop the traffic study and will assist the city in soliciting professional services for phase 2B. That is part of the requirements of some of the funding sources, and that is why the project phase 2 was broken into A, B, and C sub-phases. So they required us that for some of the services, like preparation of environmental technical studies and the environmental document itself, that we go out and solicit new consultants for that purpose. Mark Thomas will assist us with that process. And for phase 2, which is, as I mentioned, the topographic surveys, the detailed survey, and right-of-way delineation. So for these 2 phases, 2B and 2C, we will follow the requirements of Caltrans Local Assistance Procedures Manual. And in addition to all of this, part of the services that will be included under this amendment for Mark Thomas is to continue working with MCAG and Caltrans in identifying new sources of funding and preparing grant applications wherever these funds may be available, and also any sources that can be found and laid out now for the construction phase in the future. And I want to make sure that it is clear here in my presentation to the council that part of phase 2A is also to start the process for phases 2B and 2C. So those are documents that will be developed, consultants will be selected for those, and those would be obviously brought to the council for council's consideration. So hopefully with the council's approval of this amendment, Mark Thomas can start the traffic study soon after the approval when we give them the notice to proceed. The first step is going to be to collect traffic counts and to develop traffic forecasts for the project. These forecasted traffic levels then will be coordinated with Caltrans for approval. And based on the schedule and the way Caltrans process runs, we anticipate that the approval of the forecasted traffic numbers to occur mid-fall of this year. And then it will be the analysis of traffic operations after that. And the traffic operations will be analyzed for project alternatives, as I mentioned, and to see what type of intersection controls are needed, and the number of lanes that are needed for the project, and also how the project can actually be sequenced and phased as we move forward. The draft traffic study is scheduled at this point to be submitted to Caltrans in spring 2022. And obviously, as I showed you in the slide presentation, the final phase is phase 3, which is the final design of the project, the engineering design of the project, and the right-of-way acquisition. And obviously, at that point, yet that is another decision point for the council, and consideration of the council will be requested at that time. One thing before I introduce the our consultants who are here, I have not been involved in this project extensively since I recently, just over a year ago, I joined the city. But in pursuing the presentations to the council, a number of questions came up. And I, as an engineer, mostly uninvolved in the project, I sat back and I asked myself, how do I answer the council members? When you ask certain questions, I have to, as an engineer, look for data, look for information that is going to back up my judgment and my recommendation or my conclusions of to that question. How do I develop that response? For that, I need data. So a number of questions that have come up basically had to do with traffic and could only be answered through traffic studies and numbers that are based on traffic. And so present traffic levels, forecasted traffic levels, and numbers. That is the reason that I pulled traffic study from phase 2B into phase 2A to expedite that portion of data collection. So we could be in a position where we can say, okay, this is what our study says. These are the numbers that we have. And based on the engineering standards and the methods that are used nationwide, this is how we can answer the council's question as far as how much traffic are we expecting and when on this road? How many lanes do we need? In what sections, how many lanes can we have? How can we phase this? What type of intersections are we going to have? Where can we have medians and not have medians, and for how many years based on the forecast? So my recommendation here as a humble engineer is for the council to proceed with this phase so we can have the information that we need to provide the council with educated responses that are backed up by the numbers that have been developed and the information that are gathered through this phase. So with that, I want to recognize our consultant. I believe two are here, Ryan Bissiger and also Ed Noriega. Ed has been involved in this project since very beginning, and he manages this project for us and has been the main contact as far as developing the funding sources and helping us with that. So they are both here tonight, and with that, we are ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll go to council for questions. Mr. Jones, any questions of staff?
No questions. I mean, I do have my concerns with this total project, especially when it comes to build out. If I can give my thoughts and concerns, it would be when this project was presented, it was to alleviate traffic off Pacheco, so Pacheco flows a little better. And I feel like it's kind of shifting to more of kind of creating another route around town for more local traffic than bypass traffic. Again, this is almost 2 miles out of someone's way if they're passing through town, is what Pioneer Road would be. It doesn't sweep on through. There's no real long curves to it. There's right angles. You got signal lights, and the signal lights are going to slow down traffic, and they're going to slow down existing traffic that don't have an issue or that are not impacted right now on Pioneer. So these are my main concerns. What are we going to do to the existing flow of traffic that uses it every day? I'm a frequent user of that road, and I don't see a problem as it's laid out. So I see this as just a planning document that will kind of confirm what we're thinking. I'm a big fan of data and numbers. And so I'm interested to see what we come up with. So I do appreciate staff for answering a lot of questions that I had earlier this week on this item here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any questions or comment, Mr. Lambert?
Just a comment or maybe a question. So the traffic study, so from hearing from the past, we have not actually found out what our traffic would be through there by the count of vehicles or so this is going to be moving forward with this next phase to get that actual count, correct?
That is correct. And if to the extent that there's some data may be available, we are going to update those, use them. But this is basically a fresh start to develop existing counts and based on the engineering process, forecast these into the future. The road that, any road that is built has to meet not only today's demands, but also generally we go 20, 25 years into the future. So those projections have to account for that. Otherwise, your road very quickly becomes obsolete. There's no need for it if it only meets today's demands and not tomorrow's or down the road a couple of decades needs. So yes, we will take existing traffic information and we will also project those into the future.
So I actually I took it upon myself. I actually drove this road a couple of times this last week during days off, and I actually made it pretty quick myself, just coming through between, you know, Walmart and Target off that road down to Pioneer, cutting across from Pioneer over to Mercy Springs. Minimal stop and minimal traffic, and I tried to do it at I thought would be one of the busy part of time of the days. I think the only place I ran into an issue was at Mercy Springs and Pioneer, just because there's no stoplight there, just a stop sign. But it would be interesting to see the study.
Quite frankly, as an engineer, I'm excited. I want to see the data.
Right.
My gut says one thing, but my engineering side says, where's your data?
Correct.
So that's really, as an engineer, I'm excited. I want to have this data.
Another thing I was thinking about also is my business side, pulling traffic away from, you know, 152 there through town. We be taken away from businesses, you know, not driving by and saying, hey, let's stop off, let's get something to eat right here. Those are some things that I thought about also. But the future is the future.
Yes, and I'm not an expert in NEPA, but generally impact on businesses sometimes are included and required to be included. So there is some level of analysis when federal funds are involved in a project. But I'm not clear at this point exactly to what extent that is looked at.
Next year we won't know. So that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lewis, any comments or questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any questions, just a couple of comments. And I think at the beginning of this project, one of the things that I had concern, like Councilmember Lambert, is pulling away traffic from our commercial on Pacheco Boulevard. It was probably a hope of mine that this could be more of like a commercial bypass to get those big trucks around the town so they're not slowing traffic down on Pacheco. And like him, Pioneer runs pretty smoothly right now. So it'll be interesting to see what the data is going to be outside of probably towards the end of the week, where in the past when we had full workforces out there, Pacheco was pretty jam-packed from Walmart all the way through the end of town up to Mercy Springs, and it was hard to get through town. It was just stop traffic. And I began to see people, and it would probably be mostly locals within town, using either Ortegalita or Center Avenue going south to access Pioneer Avenue out to Mercy Springs. And then you would see a lineup at the stop sign on Pacheco and Mercy Springs. So again, with that, I would like to see the data and what the projections are going forward on this, because right now it doesn't show that the necessity of that. But as things are done, if you build it, they will come. So that's how it goes. All right, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Mr. Yamas, any comments or questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, sir. I had a question about the traffic study. Now, is the traffic study just going to encompass the current and forecasted traffic on this project, or is it going to include the overall impact to the city as a whole? Are we going to have some of that in this study?
No. Once the study that you have in mind, that's basically a citywide, and that will be done after the general plan is updated. So that is a totally different level. And I see Ed came on. Ed has more detail on this, and he can answer this better.
Certainly. Good evening, everyone. The traffic study for the Pioneer Road widening project, mainly, it not only looks at the segment that we're studying for Pioneer Road, but adjacent intersections, just to see how it affects those adjacent intersections along Pacheco Boulevard, as well as the resulting intersections and the type of control that would be needed along Pioneer Road so that it operates smoothly. And also, I think I just wanted to also add to some of the comments that that were expressed earlier this evening about the Pioneer Road being a potential bypass for regional traffic and how it may affect business on Pacheco Boulevard. The direction that we received early on in the process a year ago was that the intent of Pioneer Road was not to make it a bypass for regional traffic going through the city that may affect businesses on Pacheco Boulevard, but to serve the local residents of the city, to make sure that they can still get around the city without having to only rely on Pacheco Boulevard. And I think I may have heard a comment like that from Mr. Jones about squared up intersections to make sure that it's designed to accommodate the locals, for folks that know that it exists, not necessarily someone that's coming through the city that's not aware of it. I think that was the former city engineer made it clear to us that we don't want big signs along 152 and Pacheco Boulevard letting all traffic coming through that go through this other section of roadway, because it would, I think that defeats the purpose of implementing this project so that it can serve the locals.
Okay. Yeah, just to follow up on my question was, if we're going to forecast the amount of traffic we're going to use here, and then how it's going to affect other intersections, other roadways, I think that would include that broader study. But again, the comment is that the road is working fine now. It does need maybe repaving. There are some potentially traffic issues with blind spots coming off south onto Pioneer. Again, I don't see great need right now. I understand future planning, but I also understand that much of that can be developed by developers as we incorporate or as they develop. So be interesting to see the studies, and I think that there's going to be a lot more questions as we move along. Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Llamas, as far as this traffic study for the entire city, that is, I just wanted to go back to that. That is something that will be done. The traffic circulation study that was done for the whole city is rather outdated. It was done several years ago. And generally, those are updated once the general plan is updated, or there's major development or something that significantly affects the traffic circulation. So this is something that we have on our calendars. So as we get closer to the approval of the new general plan, we will look for a consultant to update that so we can get a handle on the overall traffic circulation in the city. And that study will also include any future or planned developments or routes. In this case, if this project is something that is still in development, that study will include the impact of this.
Very much. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. I think at that point, we should start entertaining another route, possibly to the north. As you know, most of our population is to the north, and that would probably provide a greater service for the movement of goods, services, and personnel east to west, alleviate some of that traffic coming from 165 into town, coming from the west into town. So alleviate some of that traffic as well. But again, thank you.
Yeah, quite frankly, I as I mentioned, I moved to Los Banos just over a year ago, but I'm a homeowner now and I'm a resident. So I do want to see another route up north. So it would be good at some point to have the option for me as a local to be able to get to, yes, a second route on the north side to complement this route on the south. So as a new resident, that's something that I would love to see.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. And I'm pleased to see that we're moving forward with the with the studies, and we continue to plan. I want to make sure that as we do this, that we include that the studies, we maybe have a trigger that automatically updates to go just to make sure that environmental impact reports and other things that might be outdated by the, I've watched the previous projects, and sometimes the project, it takes years and then you lose ground. So we want to keep on top of it, and I'm pleased to see that moving forward, gathering information. These are and planning, and that's the most important thing, that we plan for this growth, and it's not costing the city anything. The money is all coming from the Measure V, funds, which that's their purpose, is to plan for these for transportation. And so we're doing a nice job, I think, of handling those funds, putting them to good use. So with that, the chair will entertain a motion to adopt City Council Resolution number 6334.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lewis.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Council Resolution number 6334 as read by title.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Do I have a second?
Mayor, Councilmember Lambert, I'll second that.
Mr. Lambert? So I've got a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Lewis and a second by Councilmember Lambert to approve resolution number 6334 as read by title. Ms. Maloney, roll call?
Jones,
No.
Lambert,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Yamas,
Yes.
Faria.
Yes. Motion carried 4-1. Mr. Jones dissenting. We will move on to item 10, presentation of splash pad site alternatives. And we go back to Acting Public Works Director, City Engineer, Mr. Pazeshk. Busy night for Mr. Pazeshk.
I may have set a record with 10 items on the agenda. There is a lot that is going on in the Public Works Department. Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I would like to ask Joe Heim, our Parks and Rec Operations Manager, to present this item to you. Mr. Heim?
Good evening. Thank you, Fred. Good evening, council members and Mr. Mayor. I'd like to present you an update of the location analysis for the splash pad project. This is a project that we were budgeted in the fiscal year 21 budget this fiscal year for design of a splash pad project. And the first step here is this location analysis. It's something that we've been working on since last really summer, fall. We had a community meeting back in September, as well as we kind of rolled it into the Parks Master Plan process, which was really going on last fall and last summer. And so we had a community survey, some of those sorts of things. So we did work with, we've been working with QK Engineering as our consultant for this project. So I'll hit the next slide here if we can. So just kind of provide some background here. Hopefully you're familiar with what a splash pad is. Pretty much every one of them is going to look a little bit different. So there's a picture of one. I think the pictures throughout this presentation, you're going to see different designs. And they basically all have the same idea. It's water fun. It's a spray park or a water playground. Water shoots out from the ground or through these different park amenities. Sometimes it's a big bucket or something like that dumps down. So it can shoot out, spray out, shower out in different ways. But usually results in the kids having a lot of fun. So splash pads typically have a slip resistant surface. So in this case, you can see some brushed concrete there. There's various nozzles, water features that can shower rain, mist, and splash pads operated at 0 water depth. So that's really the biggest difference between a splash pad and a pool, right? Is that it's 0 water depth, which means there's not a lifeguard on duty. Now, the rest of requirements for a splash pad are very similar to a pool. In fact, they reference the same California Health Code ordinances for that. So typically, and in California specifically, a recirculating tank is utilized to collect, filter, and sanitize water. This is because of water use, right? So in other areas that might not have environmental requirements that California has, they might connect it to their water system and waste a lot of water. So in California, the most common system, which is typically required by the county, is a recirculating tank. So it's a large tank that's in the ground next to the splash pad, and it is doing those filtering, collecting, and sanitizing water. Splash pads do typically operate seasonally. I believe Fresno's, it was from May to September. Sometimes, it's April, sometimes it's May, sometimes it's September, sometimes it's October, August. So does typically operate seasonally, and that's not only for the weather, but also for the longevity of the equipment, that motor running. It's a lot of hours to put on it over the summer. So if we go to the next slide, please. So quick benefits here of a splash pad, and these are things that really came out of that Parks Master Plan process, and was one of, if not, up there as one of the probably top 3 most recommended highest priority projects to come out of the Parks Master Plan. And I think the things that really stood out as benefits to a splash pad were it's free access for community fun. So a pool, you might have a membership charge, a sports field, you might have a league registration fee, but for a splash pad, you come and you have fun with your family. And so I think it's something that really is community wide and really reaches families. Los Banos also does not currently have a water feature, which is why I think it's such a high priority for the community residents to see a splash pad come into Los Banos. So the community pool closed about a little over 10 years ago, and we've had these hot summers that we always have, and we don't have a water feature, and so that's one of the biggest reasons why people want it. And of course, people want it because it's fun. A lot of communities around the Central Valley have splash pads. We visited a handful in Fresno. I think just driving around to neighboring cities, you see them, and they are it's anticipated to be one of, if not the most popular location for parks in Los Banos. So we expect a lot of traffic at our locations. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So as I kind of touched on with the pool requirements, there is a number of requirements that you must meet in order to meet compliance and health requirements. And so some of these include things like a restroom within 300 feet, hose bib within 50 feet. And there's also some that you might not expect, such as requirement of shower heads. And so that the number of shower heads depends on the size of your splash pad. So a 5,000 square foot splash pad would require 8 shower heads. So it depends on the size of how big, because every splash pad, like I mentioned, it's different. Sometimes the features are different, but also the shapes of them can also be different. So that's a requirement. The drinking fountains, and then some technical requirements like 4-inch sewer line, 1.5-inch water supply line, so things like that. And then there is a pool house next to a splash pad that operates the splash pad. So that's something that you would see next to the splash pad, or in the case of a lot of these conceptual designs, is part of the restroom facility as just an extra room. So those are kind of some of the requirements that come up. There's also site improvements that should be considered, such as fencing, obviously for safety, timer and locking systems to help protect the assets, particularly things like the showers that might come up. So making sure those aren't being used after hours or out of season, things like that. And one of the things that came out of the public meeting was that people really wanted that central amenity in the splash pad. And so in this case, I'm highlighting a spilling bucket, which is, something that fills up over a couple minutes and then it dumps. And so all the kids kind of gather around that and they're anticipating that, and then it splashes, and they all have the time of their life, and then they wait for it to fill back up again. Meanwhile, there's things like what this picture is showing, where there's smaller, more toddler friendly spraying amenities. So one thing that people really wanted was that central, this is the cool part of the splash part that they requested. They also had talked about a theme. A lot of splash pads have themes, so like oceans, or I think that first picture I showed, it was more of like a tree theme. And then the last item that I really wanted to highlight for site improvements was parking availability, which kind of leads into the conceptual designs. And if we want to go to the next slide, we can. So for this location analysis, that was one of the biggest factors was parking analysis, was parking availability. And so 2 of the locations that we selected were Ag Sports Complex and Ranchwood, which have 2 of the 3 largest playground or parking lots for the city of Los Banos park system. So the third being Colorado Ballpark, which is built out. So there's not really any space at Colorado. Ag Sports Complex has a large parking lot. There's also the adjacent landfill that's being closed and might have future parking as well. But there's the large parking lot on site that supports the softball fields and the recently constructed dog park. Ranchwood has a medium-sized parking lot that is shared by the park and the preschool that's on site. And so that was the biggest reasons why we were looking at those 2 parks. And the third park is Pacheco Park, which was identified as the #1 park that people had wanted out of surveys, was also the #1 park that people wanted when we were going to the statewide park program grant. And that was something that we had included a parking lot by where the old Dare building is, which is on the north side of where the museum is, as additional parking. So the reason why that park was selected was because it's really the central landmark park in Los Banos. So we can go to the next slide here. So what I want to show you here is a series of conceptual designs for Pacheco Park, Ranchwood Park, and Ag Sports Complex. These are conceptual. They're just sketches to try and get us to kind of, see what kind of improvements, see what locations, those sorts of things that we might be looking at. Each of them are going to share a number of elements throughout each one of them. So obviously we have the splash pad in each one. You're also going to notice a restroom and a pool house. A pump house is what it's referenced on in the conceptual design. And that's, again, a requirement with the splash pad. At Ag Sports Complex, you're going to see that it's a restroom, a pump house, and a concession stand. And that's because obviously those sports fields are out there as well, and they have that service out there. Those buildings can be your prefabricated buildings, like you might see it at Olivera, or the recent one that we just built at 7th Street Ball Field. Other similarities that you're going to see throughout these are shade and fencing. Fencing is obviously a little bit more difficult to kind of see, but each one of these we did want to include fencing, particularly here at Pacheco Park. You can see here, obviously it's very close to that highway, and that's a huge concern for us. And so in these examples, like at Pacheco Park, put the fence around the splash pad, but we also wanted to have, in the statewide park program, which is the full renovation of the park, we submitted for a fence along that sidewalk on the north side of Pacheco Park. So things to think about. There's options to have things like a double gate entrance, which is kind of like what the dog park has, where it's more difficult for kids to kind of hop that fence or get out that gate. And a lot of these designs, you'll see things like that shrub, those green shrubs around there. So if they do, say, get out of that fence area, they're not able to really go any direction. They're going to have to climb through some shrubs. And the last thing I wanted to point out with kind of a commonality was the shade structures. So it's difficult to have trees next to a splash pad because the leaves will blow into it. It's not that it's the end of the world, but it's something that you want to be mindful of in terms of leaves collecting into your recirculating tank and your collection system. So just like a pool at your house, you don't want to necessarily go out of your way to have that as an issue. So providing shade structures is a solution to that, but it also provides space for birthday parties and things like that. And one of the things that was really popular out of the public meeting was to be able to make it rentable just for that shade gazebo. So it would be non-exclusive use of the splash pad, but exclusive use of that shade gazebo for a time period, say, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. or a time slot that might be available. And that would be a way to generate some revenue and help offset some of the operation costs. And obviously a number of shade structures, it's just dependent on budget availability. So that's kind of like the commonalities that you'll see through these. And I'll kind of highlight some elements to each one of these conceptual plans. And there's a couple of each park. So for Pacheco Park, this is Pacheco Park here, and you can see the current museum scout hut there in the bottom right corner, which is the southeast corner of the park. So you'll see some grayed out, non-colored potential future phases that are included in this. So things like sports courts or parking, the future playground. It's a lot of splash pads have playgrounds next to them. It's very popular to have both at the same location. And in this case, also a parking lot, which is something to think about for Pacheco Park. Another thing I wanted to highlight with Pacheco Park was that statewide park program grant. We'll be submitting that again for March 12th. We hope to hear results back by about September. That's a full $8.5 million grant. And I'll be presenting that hopefully on April 7th, but that's a full $8.5 million grant from the state through Prop 68. So if we go to the next slide.
Mr. Mayor, before we go to the next slide, I have a question, just for clarification. Joe, the future playground area, well, naturally that's for the future. But the splash pad, will that be totally fenced in, that area?
So it would just depend on how we wanted to design it. If we were to say push the playground to a future phase, as this design here suggests, I would recommend fencing it completely. But if there was a playground there, then it would just depend on how it was designed in terms of if you could combine those to be able to, you know, have a couple gate entrances and be able to have access between the two. But for me, my priority would be to have as much fencing as possible, because that's the last thing that anybody wants is something terrible to happen or come close to it.
Yeah, not just for safety's sake, but certainly we don't want to have any kind of major vandalism going on with the splash pad. And I would hope also that for the future playground area that same thing would exist, is that would be fenced in as well to preserve the integrity of both the splash pad and the future playground. So that's basically what I wanted to say.
Yep, and I agree wholeheartedly. And the submission that we like, again, I said I'll present on April 7th, but the submission that we have for the Pacheco Park grant through the state, it does include that. So you'll see that there.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're very well.
We
Thank
can
you.
go to the next slide. So this is also Pacheco Park. You'll see a little bit larger of a parking lot that kind of comes into the park a little bit. Playground more on the southwest side, I guess you would say, and possibly a 5 to 12-year-old playground area and a 2 to 5-year-old playground area. Just kind of a different design that you might look at. Again, you see some of those commonalities: the pump house, the shade structures, landscaping, fencing, those sorts of things. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, one of the biggest concerns after the fencing at Pacheco Park is parking. I think I kind of said it before, I think you can build a parking garage there and you'd still have some popularity, especially on football games and things like that and events. But obviously we want to try to provide the best that we can do. And of course there is the parking along the highway as well. The one thing I wanted to highlight with Pacheco Park is, you know, I would say that the site improvements are probably the highest at this location. The other locations, you're not constructing a parking lot, or you're not, you know, having to make quite as many improvements on site. The other two locations have playgrounds. Of course, the positive of Pacheco Park is that it's so central to Los Banos and has something like 40,000 cars that drive by each day. And you know, I've referenced it multiple times, but I really think it's kind of the billboard for the city. And you know, I do think it's a very important park for Los Banos. So if we can go to the next slide. So looking at Ranchwood Park, which is down on Stonewood Drive, it's where the preschool is. The preschool just gets cut off in this picture. There is a medium-sized parking lot there just north of where the playground area is, and that playground area that's drawn in here, that's obviously existing, and this would be working off of that. You'd have some ADA walks into that splash pad area. And it would obviously cut into some of the open space at this park, but there would still be some open space between the landscaping where the shade structure is there and the fencing for the neighbor. Similar deal as the other parks in terms of restaurant or in terms of shade structures. The one big difference here is that we would have to install a restroom, which would obviously we'd connect off of Stonewood Drive there as far as utilities, but that would need to be constructed. And obviously the splash pad and its amenities. My biggest concern with Ranchwood Park is the impact on the neighborhood. This is a residential area in a subdivision, and I would recommend looking at, you know, some sort of traffic analysis around this park. You're looking at a very popular amenity that would be going into this park. There is a parking lot. There is some street parking, but it's something that I think should be continued to be evaluated. So that would be the biggest downside that I have for this park. But otherwise, as you can see here, that design there, and then we can go to the next slide. And this kind of shifts it back. Again, this might have some impact on the neighbors, but it would also get it a little farther away from the road. similar features, and the shade arbor that's on site, that's kind of behind the playground there. That's that big rectangle where the Ranchwood Park is on the Google image. That would obviously be able to be better used or better utilized with the splash pad, and then of course some supporting shade structures around it. So that's Ranchwood. We'll go to the next one here. And so this is the last one here, Ag Sports Complex, which is out there on the north end of town. The park would need a new restroom, and it does need a new restroom regardless of this project. The only real question for me is if it's going to be a restroom and concession, or a restroom and concession and a pump house facility. When and if this decision is made on this splash pad, another thing to consider is the restroom at Ag Sports Complex. That dome facility is not in good condition. Public cannot access the upstairs, and the downstairs is not in good shape either. So something that we want to get replaced regardless of this project, but would need to be replaced with the splash pad potentially going in there. It's not shown here, obviously, because this is a old Google image. The dog park is right there. It would sit between the dog park and the north field. This is a currently undeveloped area of the park, and it does have the access from the parking lot. This facility obviously is a facility that I think anybody that goes out there would tell you is deteriorating. One of the items earlier on the day was the per capita item from the consent agenda, and that would regrade those fields, and that's something that we want to regrade those outfields and fix irrigation issues in both of those fields to try and help upgrade that. Obviously, the restroom is something we want to upgrade, and the parking lot does need some future work, but it also, it serves its need as it is now, and the dog park is there, and hopefully will bring continue to bring more people to that park. Long term, this is a park that we had looked at extensively because it is adjacent to that landfill that's being closed through Public Works. And so long term, this is a park similar to Pacheco Park where we want to make it a destination park. We want to make it something where you want to it doesn't need to be next door to your house. You want to drive to this park and enjoy it with your family. There's already a number of amenities on site, and so this would just add one more. It is on the north end of town, so it is a little bit out of the way for a lot of people in town. Obviously, we live in a smaller community, but that has come up as a concern from the public. So improvements to this park are something that we'd like to do, whether it includes a splash pad or not, but we do think this is a viable location, and I think that is, you can go to the next slide. I think that's the last. So timeline. As I mentioned at the start of this, we were budgeted for design this fiscal year. And so if you skip down here to spring 2021, our goal would be to design this as soon as we selected a location. And then we would seek funding for construction in fiscal year 21-22, which is the next fiscal year. We would hope to construct by fall, winter, early spring of 21-22. And then have an opening by spring of 2022 for that 2022 summer. This is ideal timeline in terms of getting this project done for next summer. We would need a location to obviously design, but moving forward, that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at. Is we need a period for design, we need a period for construction, and then we'll be looking to open in the nearest spring, summer period, whether that's 2022 or down the road. Next slide, please. So before I kind of get to questions here, one thing I wanted to get to was talking about selecting a location and the splash pad in general. Obviously, as I kind of reiterated throughout the presentation, it's a highly popular topic and something that I hear about regularly, especially back when the public would be coming to the community center, and it's something that people are always, hey, when are we getting this? And You know, I went to this community and I thought this was so great. And so it's something that I think, you know, nobody can deny that it's a popular amenity request. It's obviously also a large project. And so that's, you know, something that we need to evaluate, because I think, as you'll notice through these conceptual designs, is there's quite a bit of site improvements to make at each one of these locations. So being mindful of the budget and of figuring out, okay, you know, we know the splash pad needs to go, we know a restroom needs to go in, but some of these other site improvements, you know, how far do we want to go? A park like Pacheco Park, parking lot considerations, the rest of the park improvements, same thing with Ag Sports Complex, things like that. How, you know, what's the direction that council might be looking at? And then I also just wanted to take a minute to recognize that, you know, this funding for this project anticipated to come from the Park Development Fund. It's something that, you know, I personally would want to recognize finance and planning for creating that reserve in the Park Development Fund, whether we pursue this project or whether we decide to go a different direction. The fact that we have this option available to us, I think, is a pretty significant leap forward for Parks and Rec, and really kind of gives us options moving forward, whether it's looking at a splash pad or whether it's looking at future improvements in parks. That's occurring because other departments are helping to create that reserve. So that's my presentation. If anybody has questions.
Thank you, Mr. Heim. Excellent presentation. I want to commend you and all the staff on how we've involved the community on this. I'm going to go to questions to council in just a second, but before we do, just one thing I want to say is I don't like the ag complex as a location because children have a difficult time walking, skateboarding, or bicycling there. And the other two locations are accessible for children in those three means of transportation which they commonly use. So now we'll go ahead and go to council for questions, comments. Mr. Jones?
Yes, Mayor. So if we're going to do the splash pad, all I request is that we go big on it. We make it the coolest splash pad that we can imagine, just because it's going to be probably quite a few more years down the road before we do a pool. So I don't want to go half-ass on a splash pad. I want to go big. I want to have all the bells and whistles. I want other towns to be envious of our splash pad. So that's where I stand on that.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I agree. Mr. Lambert?
Yes, of course, I'm with you with the ag complex, you know, thinking about how they're going to get there along the side of the highway. I'm thinking Pacheco Park with the second picture, but is there going to be an age group? Is it just going to be mainly just towards small children? Because I know there's junior high kids, you know, that we need to look out for also for this area or for something like this.
Sorry. So a lot of times splash pads have different areas within them geared at different ages. So you might see an area that has, like some of those pictures had shown, of kind of gentler spraying systems for younger ages, toddlers, things like that. And then as you get up to that bucket 8, the big spilling buckets that you might see at other park locations that are kind of a central amenity. Typically, I think they're probably graded for ages 5 to 12, but you do see a lot of, you know, 13, 14, 15-year-olds that, of course, love to get dumped on as well. But it's a lot of times splash pads kind of have different zones that are kind of geared for different age groups, so that, you know, toddlers not, you know, getting dumped on by a lot of water, and older kids at the same time are able to have a funner experience, more interactive experience.
Thank you. And I'm kind of like Councilmember Jones. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Make it worth a while. Appreciate it, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Ms. Lewis?
Yes. And question, Joe, on the toddler splash pad area that, you know, we're looking at different age groups, and I would hope that maybe we would include something, for our junior high school, because they're going to want to get out there also and have some fun, since we're not looking at a swimming pool anytime in the near future. So that may mean that we have to do 3 different phases, possibly, for the splash pad. But in the toddler area, for the small ones, sometimes you're going to have parents that may be concerned about their children, being out there experiencing it right away. Will a parent be allowed to be in there with their toddler to help them get used to being in a splash pad area?
Typically, yes, that is something that's allowed. I don't think you see it too commonly, but usually mom wants to sit back and, and relax, but to kind of help that comfort level, yes, that would be. And kind of to touch on the different age groups again, as we get into the design process, that's something that we can certainly work into. The design of the splash pad is gearing it at multiple age groups.
Yes, okay. And in regards to my opinion about location, naturally, Pacheco for me, with all the reasons that you mentioned, because it's centrally located, people going down Pacheco, which is probably just about every citizen in our town, will be able to see it and know it's there. Ranchwood, the impact on the community as far as parking and such, would be a concern of mine. And something that wasn't mentioned for the ag sport area, even though we have the bottle dump area that the city owns, and our dog park is out there when the sports ag was active, with baseball being used. The thing that we have, another portion of what's being active out there is farming. And when you have spraying and tractors that may be accessing and dirt flying, those are things that will end up in your filter and can cause, I would assume, more damage than normal if you're not near agriculture like that. So that would be a concern for me, putting it out at the sports ag complex. Is it's just too close to agriculture out there for the time being. And the dog park is out there, but it's grass, and so that's not a big issue. So that's kind of my take on it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Mr. Yamas.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just have a couple questions. First of all, I see the enthusiasm in you regarding this project, and that's good. I think it's going to add to the quality of life, and it's going to add to our character here in the city, much needed. However, what's the life cycle of these splash pads? And also in consideration of hard water, it tends to go through fixtures pretty readily. Do we have something that's going to mitigate that, or have we studied that?
So regarding hard water, that's something that would come out of the design process. It is something that's obviously come up in other communities. The designer that I was talking to from QK, he did I think 5 out of the 7 Fresno splash pads, and that's something that he had mentioned was mitigating that issue. So that's something that we would deal with probably in the design phase there. And then I obviously agree with you as far as the value that this would add to the community and self-esteem and everything with adding something like this. Could you repeat the other question? I apologize.
The lifespan on these, the life cycle of these types of facilities and the maintenance costs.
Sorry about that. So yeah, the lifespan of them, they typically last at least 20 years, if not longer. You have splash pad. One of the splash pads we visited in Fresno was, I think it was constructed about 2002, and it's still running very well, strong. Like that facility, it was there was some upgrades that they needed to make to the pool house. There's now a requirement for a roof on top of the pool house that they had to make, but otherwise there was minimal motor related improvements needed. There is an operational cost that I mentioned during the presentation in terms of annual maintenance, chemicals, things like that need to be put into the facility. But in terms of lifespan, Splash pads are newer. They started really getting installed in about the early 2000s in parks. You mostly saw them more in like memorial type of parks before that in the 90s, where you'd see it just water shooting out of the ground, kids kind of running through it. So they got really popular in the 2000s and obviously to this day. So a lot of splash pads are starting to near that age of 20 plus years. So, but that's my understanding is that from my discussions with QK and my experience with other cities, they have not had issues. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. As far as the concerns, I mirror most of the other council members and mayor's concerns. So thank you. Look forward to this project going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the decision then is the location. So far, specific location, I think the only one we've had mentioned, Ms. Lewis. And I'll just go and do a quick round robin to see how everybody feels about that location for Pacheco Park, and see if that is the council consensus. Mr. Jones?
Yes, I do think maybe we should think of an alternative just in case if for some reason under engineering or planning it doesn't work out at that park. So something to kind of keep in the back of your guys' mind. So I do like Pacheco Park as the primary because it's accessible, but we probably need to think of a backup.
Okay. Would you recommend the Ranchwood as the backup?
It's so far on the north side. I don't know. I don't know if I like the other two locations, period. So I don't know. Maybe
so you would want to maybe look at another location completely if Pacheco didn't work out.
Yes. So I mean, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So.
All right. Mr. Lambert?
Yeah, I'm same here with Pacheco.
Okay, very good.
Centralizing.
All right. And Mr. Yamas? Does Pacheco Park sound like your number one as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Chair will entertain a motion to direct staff to pursue the Pacheco Park location. Who would like to make that motion?
Mr. Mayor. Go ahead. Go ahead. You can go.
Mr. Lambert?
I'd like to make the motion that we select the Pacheco Park as our primary.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Ms. Lewis?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. So we have a motion from Councilmember Lambert and a second from Mayor Pro Tem Lewis to direct staff to pursue the Pacheco Park location for the splash pad. Roll call vote, Ms. Maloney, please.
Jones,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Yamas,
Yes.
Faria,
Yes, motion carried unanimously. Thank you for bringing this project to fruition. Someday, the next big project, a pool, but a pool is going to have to be a joint project, I believe, requiring a little more support than just the city. Right now, the city, we're able to do the splash pad. Let's do the splash pad, and this is very exciting. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Heim.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
All right, so we'll go on to item 11. Consideration of default residential garbage cart size with the new waste collection services contract effective July the 1st, 2021. And we go back to Acting Public Works Director, City Engineer, Mr. Pazeshik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. The item that we have before you is for basically to receive guidance from you on the default size for the garbage cans for the single residential families here in town. Currently, the default size is 64 gallons, and our request is that you consider the 96-gallon garbage cart size as the default size for residential customers, effective under the new waste collection services contract, which becomes effective July 1st. I would imagine all of us have experienced some of the issues that I'm going to bring up here. I have a lot more detail in the staff report itself, and the staff report itself is based on a simple report and analysis that R3, our consultant who's helping us with the rate study, put together. So they have more factual, more detailed information in there. My information is based on that, so it is just as factual. One is the illegal dumping that we experience. There's not enough room in the garbage cart. So where does the garbage end up? On the side, by the street, in the alley, and that becomes an issue for the city as far as somebody has to clean it up, somebody has to take care of that, somebody has to dispose of it. So it becomes overall a waste of resources, a waste of taxpayers' dollars to take care of that problem. The other one is contamination. You have non-recyclable materials that end up in the recycling cart. So garbage cart is not big enough. There's too much garbage for the week for the resident. So the tendency sometimes is to use the space available in the recycling cart. And the big problem is once you do that, you have contaminated the recyclables. That gets dumped into the hauler's truck, and that contaminates the whole batch, basically. So there's a lot of cost and effort involved in sorting through that, and that is yet another issue to separate again the recyclables from the contamination. So the other one is overall the what is called the overage, and that's simply overfilling the garbage cart, and even worse than that as an issue is overstuffing and then tamping it down so everything gets stuck in the bottom. The hauler wants to tip it into their compactor. It's overfull. It gets dumped all over the street. Then you see the residents that obviously are not happy about that. The truck driver has to stop, clean it up. That stops the flow of collecting the trash, impacts their operation. And also if it is tamped down and stuck in the bottom, you end up potentially with the whole cart not being emptied. What do we have there? You have residents that are not happy because some of that trash is left behind, and that becomes even potential for overfilling for next pickup because it's not fully emptied out. The bigger problem, perhaps for me at least, reading this report that R3 put together, was the rate structure itself, the way it is set up under the current contract. And they tell me that this has been common practice for many years in different parts of the state, is that the difference in cost between a 64-gallon and a 96-gallon garbage cart is about $20 per month. So the incentive really is not there for folks to go to the larger size. So if they go to the default 64, the smaller size, that's what they opt for. Yes, they're saving $20 a month, but potentially we are facing the issues that I discussed there. You end up with overfilling it, you end up with contamination problems. So this creates problems elsewhere. So I'm told that the reason for this large price difference at some point, at least it was good intention, okay, make the garbage cans a little smaller by default, by incentivizing using the smaller one, it's cheaper. So people are motivated to basically recycle more, but that apparently has not happened over time, and that cost difference has not necessarily resulted in more recycling. It has resulted in the other issues of contamination, overfilling, and spillage. So R3, we asked them to put a little review together. Right now, they're conducting the refuse rate study. They are in early stages of that, but based on the analysis that they managed to do under the new collection contract with Mid Valley, using some of those parameters in the contract, they are estimating that under the new contract, the difference in cost between a 64-gallon and a 96-gallon garbage cart will be approximately $1.25 to $1.75. The exact number will be zeroed in, obviously, as the study progresses, but this is the range that they are comfortable providing to us right now. So essentially, it is a wash. It is, the incentive is no longer there. And what happens is, starting July 1st, under the new contract, there is also some fines for contamination. So for example, each occurrence of contamination is a $15 fine. So when you look at the price difference not being there, so a 96 and a 64 are basically about the same cost roughly per month, and you look at, okay, here's a $15 fine potentially. If I were the customer, the average customer, I would say, I'm not going to take that chance. For $1.50 more a month, I'm not going to risk paying that $15 fine. I'm going to go with the larger size, 96-gallon, pay for that, and move on down the road. So what we are looking for here is guidance from you on going with the 96-gallon as the default size. As I said, this provides more space, actually 1/3 more volume when you upsize from 64-gallon to 96-gallon cart. Yes, there is a little bit more cost, as I said, $1.25 to $1.75 projection at this point monthly. There's also a capital cost that will be passed on to the consumers, and that ends up being only 5 cents a month for the length of this 10-year contract. So there are numbers behind all of this that I have not put in the report. But another item that I wanted to draw the council's attention to is, a few months ago, when the contract for the new waste disposal service with Mid Valley Disposal was approved, in the contract, in the body of the contract, the default size for residential single family was already identified as 96-gallon. So that's the reason we're bringing this really over here, to make sure that this is clear to the council that under the new contract, based on the contract language, it is 96-gallon. That is a discrepancy between 96 and the current default size. I've identified the issues that we have with the smaller size and the benefits of going to a larger size, and the fact that under the new contract, the incentive really has been taken away as far as a cost differential for the resident to automatically opt for 64-gallon. The option is always there to downsize to 64, but the incentive is not there. If they really don't need it, they really don't need it. It's not a choice or a decision based on cost savings anymore under the new contract. So that is really our request, and my recommendation, again, is going to be for the council to direct us to move forward with 96-gallon as the default size, and I believe that helps us in alleviating, if not completely eliminating, some of these issues that we see around the city with overfilling and spillage or contamination of recyclable materials. And tonight, what I've asked is, since there is a potential, if depending on how the council wishes to proceed, there might be some impact on Mid Valley's new contract. So I've asked Joe Heisdorf, their CFO, to be present. Perhaps there are questions that he can answer at this point, or we may have to come back, respectfully ask to come back at a future date when we have the full impact, if any, on their contract figured out, and present those facts to you for consideration. We also have Garth Schultz with R3 Consulting Group. He is managing our refuse rate study together, and he was basically in charge of putting this analysis together. So altogether, we are available and ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll go to council and see if council has any questions of Mr. Pazeshk or Mr. Eisdorf. Mr. Jones?
No questions. I just think this is great. Defaulting to the larger can. What we're experiencing right now with the housing kind of crisis that we're in is you're getting more people in the homes. Instead of, say, 3 bodies in a home, you're getting 6 now. And so you're developing more trash. So I think this will be a way to try to mitigate some of the spillage and dumping on the side of our county roads in the future here. So I think it's great.
Very good. Mr. Lambert?
I echo Councilmember Jones' reference. I'm glad to be going with the bigger can.
Very good. Ms. Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any issues going with the larger can based on the way, as Mr. Jones said, we have more people in one household. I do have some suggestions, and certainly this is outside of what we're hearing here tonight, just because I have concern, is that I think, you know, with this contract coming up as quickly as it is, that the city and our Mid-Valley, we need to start notifying people as quickly as possible of what the expectations are. We have a city bulletin now. That bulletin should be used to notify people of, you know, what the expectation is with our new services. And, you know, things like your trash can needs to be behind the fence, or if there's going to be a warning system whereby, you know, you let the customer know that you're putting too much trash in the trash can with the bigger can and what the consequences will be. I think we just need to let the public know what they're going to be up against, so there's no surprise going into this. One of the other questions that I had in mind, and maybe Joe or Garth could remind me of this, did we discuss about in the contract if there is some sort of fine situation that's built into this contract, and the renter is in the home, but let's just say the renter doesn't pay the fine and they move, what happens? Does it default automatically to the property owner, or is the city just out of luck on that?
Yeah, I can jump in on that, Council. Thank you for having us here tonight. Typically, I think you bring up a great point when there's turnover within, say, even a multifamily complex. There's new people coming in. They may not know what the rules are. They may be doing that. So our job is to educate and make sure that people are aware of what's going on. We work directly with property owners to make sure that that information is constantly dispersed when people are coming and going. You know, we try to work with them. This is not we're not trying to be punitive at all. That's not the intent of how this program works. The intent is to have a little teeth behind the incentive to recycle appropriately. And we will have some dedicated, 2 dedicated outreach specialists in the city of Los Banos specifically for that purpose. And so when we see this happen, there's going to be a point of contact. It's not going to come, you know, anonymously without any notice. And To answer your earlier questions about outreach, we do have a website up and running with a set of FAQs. We have dedicated phone lines that are active. So you're going to start seeing a lot more of that in the very, very near future. It's rolling out as we speak.
Okay.
If I could add to that, Ms. Lewis, in Mid-Valley's contract, there are 2 presentations to the council that are built in. So the first one is coming up. We will schedule that on April 7th, and the other one on May 5. And as Joe mentioned, we have been working together on developing their landing page, their dedicated website for Los Banos residents, the FAQs, and a simple presentation on the services and what it entails and what the residents should expect. Those have been being built and developed over the past couple of months as we have gone through our transition process. And we are in the process of putting a button on city's homepage. So residents, all they have to do is go to that webpage for the city, and they will see a button, click on that, and they will be redirected to that dedicated webpage that Mid-Valley is preparing and updating. Through that, they will get information. That information will be updated continuously. And also, as presentation is made to the council and we receive council's feedback, those will go back into enhancing and improving the website itself. Through the website, we are also going to have the option for different card sizes, asking questions, or actually signing up to receive automatic updates and notices. So that is something that is going to be a live document, so to speak, and we will continue to work with Mid-Valley to update that site and as the rollout comes about, and also to provide information as law changes, things change, notices that Mid-Valley wants to put out through that site.
And certainly, I want the council and staff to understand that I'm not suggesting any punitiveness, being punitive to our residents, but I'm also a person that doesn't believe in a lot of surprises. And I think people should fairly know what the rules of engagement are, and then not be able to say, well, nobody told me about that, because we as council people hear that all the time. And a lot of times the information's out there. It may not be, just on the front page, but some residents know how to negotiate and get through the process of figuring out where it is. Others don't, and others may not be interested in trying to figure out where it is. So I think the sooner we start getting this information out to the public, the better off we'll be in handling these issues up front, and people will be ready to move forward with our new services. And I'm really excited about our new services. And again, Mr. Mayor, I'm recommending that since we do have a city bulletin now, that we help to redirect customers to Mid-Valley's website so that they can look at the frequently asked questions and be prepared and talk to staff over there if they need to do so. So thank you. That's all that I have.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. And we'll go ahead and ask staff to add that to the bulletin. And I made a note here for myself to add it to my weekly video updates, so we can get it out there so people know. So many different, in the old days that you had a newspaper and everybody read the newspaper and that was it. Now you've got a million platforms and nobody reads any of them sometimes, but so you have to kind of put it all out there everywhere to get to the people. And those are very good points. Thank you very much. Mr. Yamas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was one of my concerns as well, is pushing this information out to everyone so they understand what the new requirements are. One thing I would caution is that, even though if we provide a 200-gallon garbage receptacle, I think we're still going to have some of the same issues, because as we've talked about, the information out there, sometimes it's not accessed. Folks may not do the right thing, may continue having these problems. But I think that it's a step in the right direction, because as Councilman Jones stated, more people live in the household, so you do need a bigger receptacle. I'm just saying that the reality is the reality. We may still continue to have these problems. Thank you very much.
Very good. So,
One other question, or I
yes,
can
Mr.
ask.
Lambert?
This, any one of you can answer. Have we already thought about the businesses, the dumpsters? I believe I spoke to you once before about the dumpsters possibly being a little different for like the small business restaurants. Is there, are we going to be notified, you know, how the transition is going to be with those?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take that one. We have a pretty thorough implementation plan. Unfortunately, the COVID restrictions have slowed us down considerably in our ability to make on-site visits. You know, we're working through making sure that we have all the right protocols in place, but you know, our intent is never to surprise anybody or show up at the door and say, here's what you got now. It has to be a dialogue that happens before any service changes for it to be successful, even on our end. So we will be having engagement through billing, engagement through our web portal, the social media and outreach efforts the city's described. And our intent, we already have one recycling specialist dedicated to Banos. She's already on staff training and has been with us for a month. So our intent is to get out into the community early before this change and specifically address any of these new services that are going to happen with these businesses.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Now, if I may add to that, I'm looking at the contract itself, and we have talked to Mid-Valley over the past few months. They do have community engagement and involvement, town hall meetings. That's basically how it was described in the contract. And simply because of the COVID, we are looking at how do we accomplish that? How do we accomplish the intent of the contract? So those are the different ways that we are looking at. If COVID hopefully went out the door and vanished tomorrow, we would go to exactly what the contract says and find a few venues to basically invite folks, engage with them, and educate them that way through presentations and question and answers. But right now, the website and mailers and those types of documents is the route that we are taking actively to make sure that we inform the residents.
Yeah, and I would just add that we're in the final stages of negotiating a lease for an office downtown. We will have an office downtown available right in the heart of Los Banos, and we've already been actively engaged with the Chamber of Commerce and other local organizations to kind of make sure that we're visible and in front of these and accessible to the businesses.
Very good. Thank you. So the direction requested tonight is, do we want the 96-gallon container to be the default container? Is that correct, Mr. Pazek?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
All right. So, Mr. Jones, how do you feel about that?
Yes.
Yes.
I like it.
Okay, Mr. Lambert?
Yes, sir. I like it.
Very good. And Ms. Lewis?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
And Mr. Llamas?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I agree. Sounds like we have direction on that. So 96-gallon container will be the default. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you to Mr. Eisdorf, Mr. Pazek. Thank you for all the hard work. I know this contract has been, it's a very big project, and we appreciate the hard work on it and see it coming through. I was also, while we were here, I pulled up the website. If people Google Mid-Valley Los Banos, all the information is going to come up there. They can, so we'll put that first announcement out right here in the meeting. So Google Mid-Valley Los Banos, and we'll continue to get the word out. Thank you so much. So item 12 is next on the agenda. The appointment of commissioners to the following commissions. And the first one is the Measure H Citizens Oversight Committee. There are actually 3 vacancies. We have 1 appointment to make, and these are 2-year terms expiring December the 31st. And I will go ahead and make the motion to appoint Mr. Michael Amabile to that Measure H Citizens Oversight Committee. Do I have a second?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mayor.
Councilmember Lewis, I'll make a second.
Okay, I think Ms. Lewis got in first. So I have a motion by the mayor, second by Mayor Pro Tem Lewis, to appoint Michael Amabile to the Measure H Committee. Roll call vote, Ms. Maloney?
Jones,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Yamas,
Yes.
Faria.
Yes, and we thank Mr. Amabile. He has served our community for many years, many boards. Very knowledgeable and has a lot to contribute. Parks and Recreation Commission. There are 2 2-year terms and one unexpired term. I have 2 appointments to make, appointments to recommend, and those will be to the 2-year terms. And that will be Ms. Kimberly Flores and Ms. Shamar Pierce. I'll put that in the form of a motion. Do I have a second?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lambert will second it.
Mr. Lambert. So I have a motion by the mayor, second by Mr. Lambert, to appoint Kimberly Flores and Shamar Pierce to the 2 2-year terms on the Parks and Recreation Commission. Roll call, Ms. Maloney?
Jones,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Lamas,
Yes.
Faria.
Yes, motion carried unanimously. Item C, Planning Commission. We have 1 at-large vacancy and 1 which is a 1 2-year term expiring December 31st, 2022. And I would like to make the motion to appoint Mr. Elias Reyes to that position. And I'll take the second from Mr. Jones if you'd like. He's
Yes,
been trying
I'll
to second
gladly second
motions
that.
here for a while. Thank you. So got a motion by the mayor and second by Mr. Jones to appoint Mr. Reyes to the Planning Commission. Ms. Maloney, roll call?
Jones,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Yamas,
Yes.
Faria.
Yes, motion carried unanimously. Once again, we want to thank Kimberly Flores and Shamar Pierce and Elias Reyes for their many years of service to our city. And continuing. Item 13. This is my item. I was contacted by the NAACP about the potential of naming a street, changing the name of a street in Los Banos to honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Their initial recommendation was G Street, partially because there are not a lot of addresses to change there, but also a number of other factors. And I think it's a pretty good idea. There will be, finance involved. I've heard some conversations, but I have nothing formal. I've just heard some conversations that there might be some money available from the outside sources to help pay for the cost of making those changes. Realize whenever you change a street name, you have to, not only the cost of changing the street name, but all the people and all the businesses along that street have to have their addresses changed. And that costs too, and for all their businesses, their letterhead and contacts. And I think if the city does pursue that, I think it's incumbent upon us to pay for those changes. As I was pondering it, I was also, I drive to work every day through the presidential streets. And the presidential streets start with Washington and go all the way through, and they end with, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Harrison, the shortest presidency in history, because he gave such a long inaugural speech that in the rain that he died of pneumonia just a short time later. But we don't have a street named after President Lincoln. And I was thinking, if we're going to have presidential streets and we're going to be looking at street naming, maybe we might want to look at naming a street after President Lincoln. Off the top of my head, 7th Street actually came to mind because it runs right through the presidential area and would come together with Martin Luther King Street if we chose G Street at the community center. But those are all potential things. The question here today is, I want to ask the council is, number one, do we want to look at maybe just pursuing the change of naming a street after Dr. Martin Luther King? 2, do we want to look at naming a street after Dr. Martin Luther King and other dignitaries and important figures in our history? Or 3, do we not want to pursue it at all? And so if I could go through the council and get everyone's opinion, we can see whether we want to move forward with these ideas. So Mr. Jones, we'll go first to you.
Yes, Mayor. My only concern with G Street is that it's in 2 sections. You have over there from 7th to Mercy Springs where the courthouse is, which is the smallest stretch. And then you have over there by our industrial park, which is a little bit longer. So if we were just to do one street for right now, I would make the recommendation to just do the smaller street itself. But I'd like to give a street its own name, its own originality. And so I'm thinking if we develop a list of honorable people in history, try to come up with the criteria of what meets that, and maybe we can plan it for a new commerce district or something like that in the near future to name some of these new streets after these people. I'd be for that as well.
Okay, so would you be interested in renaming any streets after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or only pursuing it in future development?
A name's a name to me. I think it's kind of a hassle for the property owners to now have to change all their mailing, things like that. Maybe we can do if we're doing G Street plus Martin Luther King Way or street, whatever the end's going to be on it. So either or on the mailing would work. So we can do more of maybe an honorary name on it. So you have the actual mailing address could still be G Street, but it's more locally known as Martin Luther King Street. That way there's no disruption in mail, because as it is, we don't get half the mail that gets sent to us anyways. So I would not confuse the post office any more than what we have to. But if we do want Martin Luther King to have their own street in town, I think it needs to be a new street in a nice area, something where we can be proud. Normally, Martin Luther King Way is not pretty much in any city you can find. For the most part, it's not always in the best neighborhood, and it'd be nice if Los Banos changed that. So maybe we can, in one of our new developments, maybe not residential, maybe more something where it produces commerce or someplace where it's a nice development, we can start incorporating some of these names in.
Very good. Great ideas. And, in Merced, M Street, they call Veterans now, I think Veterans Boulevard or something, but it kept the M. So they kept both. But let's go through the council. Very, very good ideas here. Mr. Lambert?
You know what? I'm all for, bringing in Martin Luther King Street. I'm kind of like, I know there's going to be spinach for renaming the addresses, but like you just said, possibly like Merced with M Street with the veterans. I believe I noticed that the other day also myself. If that's something we can do with G Street, I'm all for G Street. and also naming the new, possibly like the residential areas, some of those, coming up with some type of guidelines for some of the future streets. But for now, Martin Luther King, I believe I'm okay with G Street. Maybe adding it or, seeing what we can do with the following with the G with the Martin Luther King.
Sure. And if we chose to change A Street to do a change or do an honorary, it doesn't necessarily have to be G Street. That was just a recommendation that came up front at first from the NAACP representatives here in Los Banos. So that's why I mentioned G Street. It's a council's ideas here to see where we want to go. Thank you very much. This is great. Ms. Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Martin Luther King was a great man, and I'm very proud of what he did in our culture. I think in the beginning of your information that you gave to council, one of the big concerns that I have is just the cost of doing street name changes. I think, Councilmember Jones's idea about a new, new developing commerce areas is good, but just like the presidential area on the south side, with the new developments that are coming into our city, this is an opportunity to name not only his name, but some other good historical people who have contributed to the Black community receiving equal rights in this country could be named. So that, that's kind of how I see it. I just struggle with changing names of streets. I think when I first moved here, 6th Street was Main Street, and I can only imagine how much it costs, the city and the business owners to change the names, all their banks, their personal things, whatever the cost of doing all of that, it can be a headache. But I don't think that Martin Luther King has to be some major boulevard, because that's what happens in every community. It has to be a major area. And, there's Rosa Parks, there's Sojourner Truth. There's a lot of people out there in the Black community who can have, names put on the streets and joined in with Martin Luther King. So my recommendation would be, let's approach some of our developers who are putting up communities now with their street names, and let's have them do some street naming. I mean, we've had in this gated community that's here on the south side between Center and Pioneer, have people within our community who have grown up here and have contributed to Los Banos have their names used on those streets. So I think it would be a wonderful thing to have a community where we have some of these outstanding people who have contributed to the Black community to have those streets named after them, and not just one person, but a multitude of people who have contributed as well. So that's my take on it. I'd much rather see it in a residential community. At best, the secondary would be maybe a business complex, but I think a residential community would absolutely be wonderful to do this in.
Very good. Thank you so much. Mr. Yamas.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have we talked to the businesses or residents of that street about this idea yet? If not, we should maybe reach out to them
Yes.
if we can. But I think I agree that future developments, I think, would be more appropriate to start the naming process, or to having a little bit more influence as the naming the streets, not only as civil rights workers, but maybe veterans, World War II commemorative battles, significant battles, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, things like that. Something that kind of ties us together as a nation, so that we remember the sacrifices, not only of civil rights workers who have helped form our culture and our society, but the sacrifices of those who have come before. So, but yes, if G Street is the place, then of course let's name something after the doctor.
Thank you very much. There's some great ideas here. What I think, what I'm taking from this, and maybe staff is taking too as we listen, is maybe we want to, and I don't think we've had a street naming structure or code or commission or committee. I don't remember that. And that would be, maybe that's the direction we want to take this. And we'd form a street naming committee, particularly on new developments, possibly on previous existing development, but the council seems to feel that it would be something we would want to look at in the future. Is that pretty much an accurate takeaway here, Mr. Jones?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and we should probably bring it up to try to figure out some sort of game plan. And I think as we start looking back in history at heroic figures, we can separate out from civil rights leaders, which is probably a whole neighborhood by itself because there's just so many.
Yes.
To what Mr. Yamas was saying about really spectacular veterans and things like that in history, even just famous ships. I mean, we can come up with a lot of great ideas. So I think this is going to be a good conversation to have. So
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Lambert, you feel that's a good takeaway from this?
Yeah, I believe so too. I like both Councilman Lewis and Jones. I think it would probably be easier, getting with the developers before they start naming the streets and coming up with this.
Very good. And Ms. Lewis, you too?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. And Mr. Yamas?
Absolutely, it's our town. We should have some say into what our streets are named.
Very good. So do we want to, so maybe we'll direct staff to pursue looking into a street naming committee or commission that will, and a code. We'll have to have Mr. Vaughn, enlist Mr. Vaughn on writing some code on if we're going to put some teeth into the street naming. And I would love to see that if the rest of the council is good with that. And we'll go ahead and let staff run with that now and see what they can come up with in the future. Sound good with everyone? Thank you.
Mr.
All right.
Mayor,
Mr.
just
Terrazas.
one closing comment from the staff. I think just based on the comments we heard this evening, let us go at the staff level, take a look at other street naming policies, and we can come back with some recommendations on a potential structure on how to proceed. And I think we can come back fairly soon, possibly the 21st of April, at least with some preliminary thoughts on how the council might want to proceed. So,
Okay, thank you very much. This is actually kind of exciting when you start thinking of the great names we could be promoting and putting on our streets. Mr. Yamas mentioned Guadalcanal. My father was there. So, and the thing was, there were so many great heroes. Thank you everyone for such great input. I'm so pleased with this conversation right now, and where we're taking this. So thanks again. Now we'll move on to item 14, and that's our city manager's COVID-19 status update.
let me go ahead and unmute. So just a couple things this evening, Mayor and Council. Just want to continue to, regarding vaccinations, want to continue to direct folks and refer folks to the Vaccinate Merced County website for information on vaccinations. And that address for that website is vaccinatemercedcounty.com. For those folks who may not be that comfortable with computers, Merced County Public Health does also offer a telephone number for information with vaccinations or on vaccinations. And that phone number is area code 209-381-1180. 209-381-1180. And that's a phone number for information on vaccinations, availability, clinics, et cetera, here in Merced County. The other thing of interest is Congress recently passed what's being called the American Rescue Plan. That total package does contain $65 billion, yes, $1 billion in funding for cities and counties. Based on some of the preliminary estimates. Well, let me go back a little bit. So Congress did pass that. That's on its way to the Senate. The Senate, latest I heard, there could be a Senate vote within the next couple of days on that package. That will next go to the president for his consideration. And that package contains $65 billion. There's about preliminary estimates of about $7.4 million for Los Banos in that package. No guarantee that that funding will make its way to Los Banos, but it's at least in the legislation at this point. The lobbying efforts by both the League of Cities and National League of Cities has been for flexible funding, that could replace lost revenues to the city. And the latest I heard was that it would be flexible funding to replace lost revenues and wouldn't necessarily come with a deadline for expenditure of those funds. So that is good news. Fingers crossed that makes its way through the process in the Beltway, but the staff is keeping an eye on that legislation. And we have communicated with Congressman Costa. The mayor and I were on a Zoom call with the congressman and his staff, other Merced County elected officials and other elected and appointed officials from the congressman district. We got an update from the congressman and his staff last week on that legislative package. So that is working its way through the process. Would hope that would pass and that would do a great deal for the Los Banos community. That's actually all I have on COVID today, Mayor, Council.
Thank you very much. That bill, one thing Congressman Costa was saying, they were trying to make sure that they pushed for per capita funding so that each city got funded based on their population. And sometimes it's very difficult. We have to work very hard to bring federal and state tax money back to Merced County and Los Banos because we're usually outvoted at those higher levels. But this particular bill is per capita based on the population of each city. And we're still in contact to make sure that, and we're staying on with the lobbying to make sure that funding is flexible so that we have control over it as much as possible. Thank you, Mr. Terrazas. The next item is number 15, advisement of public notices, and we go to Community and Economic Development Director Elms.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. So we have one item. This is a conditional use permit from Molina Recycling. This will be located at 1218 G Street. They're requesting a large collection recycling facility. This location previously had a recycling facility. However, it had been not utilized for more than a year, and so a new conditional use permit is required. This public hearing will be held on Wednesday, March 10th, 2021, here virtually at 5:30 p.m. using the GoToMeeting platform, and the link to the meeting will be posted on the Planning Commission's agenda. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. We'll go back now to our city manager for Mr. Terrazas for the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Lewis did mention this evening the city's new electronic newsletter, the City Bulletin. Just want to encourage folks, members of the community to subscribe to that. Lots of good information in that bulletin. Just a couple of things to call out and that are in that bulletin. Recommending as we spring forward to change batteries in your smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, and that there's an article on that in the newsletter. There's the city's annual spring cleanup event, which will be held on March 6th from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the fairgrounds. So load up your pickups, bring your debris to that annual cleanup event. And again, other good information in that bulletin. Sign up for it. That is a good source for information that's coming from the city these days. So that's really all I have there, Mayor. So thank you.
Thank you very much. My report, Merced County Association of Governments, I have been asking them, and I asked a while back about the potential of commuter buses, bus system to commute over Pacheco for our residents here, so they would be able to commute to work, those that would be able to use the commuter bus. There's a study scheduled to come back to us in, I think, the next MCAG meeting to see what they've come up with on that. As far as the Measure V committee, I think we had plenty of Measure V, the Pacheco Pioneer Pacheco corridor. We worked on that today. And then on Peninsula Clean Energy, I met with the legislative lobbyist, and they're working very, very hard to make sure we keep the cost of energy down, the cost of transferring down. The lobbyist has mentioned that there's a challenge at the state to keep the transfer costs down, and so they're working very hard to do that with the lobbying efforts. And we'll continue providing more information about that, because we will be going to Peninsula Clean Energy as a generator of power. That, by the way, for those that don't know, that the Billy Wright solar farm is part of the Peninsula Clean Energy system. So we will be pulling power from our local power generation system. And with that, I'll move on to our city council member reports. I'm sorry, Mr. Terrazas.
Apologize for the interruption. If I might, I did attend the PCE board meeting, and I had a couple items.
I'm sorry.
I might. That's okay. If that's okay,
please.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. So just a couple items from the PCE board meeting. PCE is continuing to recruit for a community outreach manager for Los Banos. That PCE employee would be located here in Los Banos. They're interested in hiring a local individual. So if folks are interested, they should go to the PCE website. And I do believe we do have a link on the city's website to that job opportunity as well. The other thing I will mention from that board meeting is the staff provided a presentation to the board regarding some anticipated revenue shortfalls for PCE over the next couple of years that could have some potential impact on program offerings here in Los Banos. I've asked for a follow-up meeting with the PCE staff to get a better idea of what those revenue shortfalls are and how they could potentially impact Los Banos. So hopefully you saw that email earlier today, Mayor, but we'll be scheduling that meeting with the PCE staff. And if there is information for the council, we'll certainly bring that to the council and update the council on those revenue shortfalls and those potential impacts on their program offerings here in Los Banos. So just wanted to highlight that for the council. That's all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terrazas. And thank you for sitting in that meeting for me.
Of course.
I had a previous commitment and I couldn't make that one. Now we will go on to our city council member reports. And tonight we start with Mr. Lambert.
Nothing to report, but I want to thank all the presenters today. They did a great job presenting all their items.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have nothing to report. I do concur with Councilman Lambert that all the presenters were quite informative today and were able to give us information that in a way that was understandable so that we could move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yamas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say that Mrs. Nunes was having issues with some of the homeless. Spoke with her, and I want to thank the police department for contacting her and working through that very challenging issue. Mrs. Nunes was very pleased with the officer interaction, so hopefully we'll have a breakthrough with that. Secondly, I'm glad that trash has been on time, so that's real good news. And third, noticed at our College Green Park that they started to paint the community building there, and so that's all great news. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones?
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, I will start with condolences to the family and friends and our city, the loss of Colleen Menifee. Her memorial was today, and I presented a proclamation in her honor. She was a school board member for over 2 decades. She was involved in many, many organizations, Tree Committee, Arts Council, school, Scout leader, so many things. All she did was give of her time to make Los Banos a better place. And she will be very, very greatly missed. And we send our deepest condolences to her husband, Jerry. My daughter worked for them for a year, so we're rather close, and wonderful people, and very sad to see that time has come. Next on my report here tonight is join a city commission. We have commission openings, and right now we have Measure H Citizens Oversight Committee. We still have vacancies there, 2. We have 1 vacancy on Parks and Rec, and we have 1 vacancy on the Tree Commission. So go onto the city's website and look up those commissions, committees, become part of your city's government. Our goal is to involve as many people as possible in these decisions, just as my goal is to involve our council. One of my goals as your mayor is to tap into the expertise and the passions of every council member and bring them to fruition for the betterment of our community. And as I said, that street conversation tonight really was a beauty, along with the splash pad conversation. So I'm very pleased with the directions we're going. We're working to serve our citizens in the best way possible. And with that, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lewis.
Yes, Ms. Lewis.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Mayor, Yamas here. Second that.
Mr. Yamas? Very good. So I have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Lewis and a second by Councilmember Yamas to adjourn the meeting. Roll call vote.
Jones,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Yamas,
Yes.
Faria.
Yes. Motion carried unanimously. Meeting adjourned at 6:43 p.m. Thank you, everyone.